After securing North Africa in 1943, the next Allied concern was control of the eastern Mediterranean. The Suez Canal was now safe, but German aircraft could still strike Allied shipping routes from Italy and from Axis held bases in the Balkans. The British, determined to eliminate these threats, persuaded the United States to support an invasion of Italy. In July 1943, the Allies launched their assault on Italy with the invasion of Sicily, stepping onto European soil with high hopes that were quickly tested by a harsh reality. Rather than a swift victory, the campaign turned into a brutal struggle, as Italy's rugged, mountainous terrain provided ideal strongholds for the defenders. Axis forces fought fiercely at every turn, and even after Italy officially surrendered later that year, German troops rapidly reinforced the peninsula and dug in for the long haul. What began as an opening move became one of the longest, most grueling theatres of the European War, with German forces stubbornly resisting every mile until May 1945. Yet, as hard-fought as the Italian campaign was, the most decisive Allied stroke was still waiting on the horizon, across the Channel in France. The single greatest Western Allied operation of the war was D-Day, the massive amphibious invasion designed to liberate France. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes offer a famously realistic depiction of what soldiers faced on one of the beaches. Behind the success of D-Day lay months of painstaking preparation. From February to June 1944, American, British, and Canadian forces trained relentlessly across the English countryside, assembling an unprecedented invasion force. The Allies gathered a fleet of 10,000 aircraft, ranging from heavy bombers to transport planes ready to drop airborne divisions behind enemy lines, alongside more than 4,000 landing craft and 80 warships tasked with bombarding the coast and delivering troops to shore. When the assault began, the invasion force struck 5 targeted beaches along the Normandy coast. At Utah Beach, American forces secured their objectives with relatively light losses of about 250 men, while British and Canadian troops faced heavy fighting but achieved crucial breakthroughs at Gold, Juno, and Sword. The hardest struggle unfolded at Omaha Beach, where American soldiers encountered devastating resistance in the bloodiest fighting of the day. Yet, despite the horrors on Omaha's shores, D-Day proved an overwhelming success. The Allies established a firm 60-mile beachhead, opening the floodgates to pour endless streams of troops and equipment into Western Europe. Within the first 100 days following the D-Day landings, the Allies unleashed an astonishing scale of logistical power onto the beaches of Normandy. They successfully funneled 2.2 million troops, 450,000 military vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies onto the European continent, transforming their initial beachhead into a massive, unstoppable force that would push deep into occupied Europe. Yet progress was slow, as the dense, tangled hedgerows of Normandy heavily favoured the German defenders, stalling the Allied push until a decisive breakthrough was finally achieved on July 9th. Once the deadlock was broken, the advance accelerated at a breathless pace. Paris was liberated on August 24th, Brussels fell on September 2nd, and by September 12th, American units had crossed the border into Germany. For the first time in the war, the Nazi regime was forced onto the defensive on its Western Front. By late 1944, Allied momentum stalled as supply lines stretched thin across the continent and German resistance stiffened along the border. Taking advantage of the lull, Germany launched a desperate surprise counteroffensive in the Ardennes region of Belgium on December 16, 1944, an engagement that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans sought to split the British and American lines, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on the Western Front. For a brief, tense moment, Allied commanders feared their front might collapse. However, through tenacious fighting, often in brutal, freezing winter conditions, American and British troops held the line. By early January 1945, the German offensive had completely broken. With their armour and reserves exhausted in the Ardennes, Nazi Germany had no major counterattacks left to launch, clearing the way for the Allies to push unhindered into the heart of the Reich. While the Western Allies fought their way through France and Belgium, the Eastern Front remained the most savage battleground of the war. Human life was treated with brutal disregard, Both Germans and Soviets took few prisoners, leaving soldiers with a justified fear of death or starvation upon capture. With fighting frequently fought to the absolute last man, casualties on both sides reached catastrophic levels. By June 1944, right as the Western Allies were landing at Normandy, the Red Army had already expelled German forces from Soviet territory and was aggressively advancing westward. The momentum only grew in August 1944 when Soviet forces invaded Romania and crossed the Vistula River in Poland. Pushing relentlessly through the fall and winter, the Soviets set the stage for January 1945, when the Red Army launched its final crushing offensive directly toward Berlin. The Battle of Berlin marked the brutal climax of the war in Europe. On April 20th, Soviet forces broke into the city, initiating intense street-by-street fighting against a desperate defense that increasingly relied on teenage boys and elderly men from the Hitler Youth and Volkssturm militia. Recognizing that total defeat was inevitable, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker on April 30th. Just days later, on May 7, 1945, German military leaders signed an unconditional surrender to the Allies, leading President Harry Truman to officially proclaim VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Yet, even as Europe celebrated its liberation, the war in the Pacific still raged on. By May 1945, American forces had captured Okinawa, just 325 miles south of Tokyo, intending to use the island as the launch pad for a massive, bloody invasion of the Japanese mainland. However, that invasion never came. Instead, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th. Overwhelmed by the destruction, Japan announced its intention to surrender on August 10th, making August 14, 1945, VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, and officially bringing World War II to an end. The human losses were staggering. World War I resulted in roughly 9 million total deaths, consisting primarily of military casualties. In stark contrast, World War II saw an unimaginable scale of destruction that far exceeded anything the world had ever witnessed, taking the lives of approximately 15 million military personnel, along with at least 15 to 25 million civilians, with some estimates placing civilian deaths as high as 40 million. This horrifying civilian toll was driven by the systematic genocide of the Holocaust. Mass atrocities committed in China by Japanese forces, devastating strategic aerial bombings of major cities, and widespread starvation, forced labor, disease, and displacement across the globe. With the war finally brought to an end, a victorious yet deeply scarred world was left to confront a profound question. What would Western civilization, and human society as a whole, look like in the aftermath of such an enormous, unprecedented catastrophe? The search for that answer, amid the ashes of global conflict and the rise of new superpowers, would ultimately define the political, geopolitical, and cultural landscape for the entire second half of the 20th century.